G'day and welcome. This is The Onside Kick, an NFL podcast brought to you by Fox Sports Australia. I'm your host, Chris Janssen, and with me, as always, Ted Smith. Looking good.
Buddy.
Looking great. Feeling very festive for Christmas, it seems like, and you as well, Hugo.
Yeah, good to be here.
Fantastic.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Hey, it is a special Christmas episode this week, so might be a slightly different feel because we have managed to land a huge special guest as well. Many thanks to Hugo, who was in touch with the very special Eric Mangini, who will be joining us shortly. We've got a bunch of questions that we're going to
call him very special.
He is very special in an NFL sense, not in an intellectual sense. He is, in fact, extremely intelligent, as you are about to find out. So, without further ado, why don't we jump straight in with some questions for the great man. As good journalists on this podcast, mate, we did do a little bit of research before we jumped into this chat, and I noticed that none other than your own Wikipedia page had informed me that you coached the Q Colts to 2 regional championships. The Q Colts, of course, a semi-professional team in Melbourne. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience here in Australia?
Yeah, I never thought I was going to be a football coach, and what happened is my brother is an investment bank or was an investment banker. And he was working in Melbourne, and it was the junior year of college, and I wanted to do study abroad. So he said, why don't you come out to Melbourne and study here? So I applied, got into the University of Melbourne, went out around Christmas time, and there was a bunch of time between when I was going to start school and when I got there. My brother Kyle was working all the time. It was back in the day. There was no real cable. There was no real cell phones. I didn't know anybody. So I was looking for something to do, and this woman he worked with was at a sporting goods store, and this guy, Stan Long, was trying to pick her up, and it was telling her how he coached American football and his extensive background. So she goes back to the office. She tells Kyle. Kyle tells me, and I think, okay, this might be a good way to get to know some people in Australia and do something I'm interested in. So I go seek Stan out, ask him if I can help out with his team. He's coaching a team called the Doncaster Devils, which had been a really one of the outstanding teams in the competition. He allows me to volunteer. We go to practice. And again, this is before the internet, so you couldn't check people the way you check people now. But it didn't take very long to realize that even though Stan looked like he played in the NFL and played at a high level of football, he really had no idea. So this goes on for about 2 weeks. The Devils get frustrated with Stan. They let him go and they say, will you coach this team? And I'm thinking, I'm not really in a position to do that, but I loved the guys, I loved the team, and I wanted to help out. So I said, I'll do what I can. So I was getting the playbook faxed to me from my college coach. I would study it during the day, and then we practiced in the evenings, and I'd put things in the evenings. This went on for probably another 2 weeks. The team had too much damage had been done. The team folds. I think, okay, I'm done with football in Australia. I'm just going to go to Melbourne University, enjoy that experience. But a group of the guys that I had made friends with went to this expansion team called the Q Colts, and they said, just come down and take a look at it. And I had loved it, and I loved being with the guys. So I go down, end up becoming the de facto defensive coordinator, head coach. We get towards the summertime. I've got to go back to school or go back to America to make money for school. And they said, well, what would it take? What would you make for the summer to prep for school? We'll pay you that amount if you stay and coach. And I said, okay, that'd be great. So I did that as my summer job, and we ended up winning the championship against the Berwick Miners, who had won 26 straight games. And it was this amazing experience. So I go back to school and decided to take the second semester of my senior year off and go back and coach the Colts, bring a buddy of mine with me. We coached the team again. We ended up winning the championship again. I go back to university, finish up in about mid-year, and decide I want to try coaching as a profession. But I never thought that's where I was heading. I thought football coaches were just glorified gym teachers with whistles. But after having that experience in Australia with those guys, it changed everything, and it changed the whole trajectory of my life.
And given all your experience then with them in Melbourne, would you call yourself now an honorary Australian?
Well, my brother lives in Brighton. He's actually married to an Australian girl. My niece and nephews all have very cute Australian accents. So we haven't been back to Australia in a while. I can't wait to get back, but I have a family member there currently.
And the Australian weather, I'm guessing, probably turned you into a fan. Have you been back to Australia since, or do you try to make a habit of coming back as much as possible?
Yeah, pretty frequently. I'd love to someday do half a year in Australia and half a year in the U.S. Maybe if the Australian football scene continues to grow, the American football scene continues to grow, there'll be some opportunity like that. But I think it's love Australia, love the people, love the country. Um, Everything about it, I think, is fantastic.
So that was obviously one of your very first coaching appointments. I'm guessing your playbook at that point was probably quite thin. What was added to it at that point? What did you think the local Australian team would be capable of in terms of learning a playbook?
One of the things about coaching there is it would be similar to coaching rugby or Aussie rules here in the States. The people who do it are into it, and it's intensely important to them. And so I was able to put in a lot of things that maybe you wouldn't be able to do with a different group. And also I coach guys from the age of 18 all the way to, we had a guy who was 48. We called him the fossil. He was an ex-Vietnam vet who had relocated to Australia, an American guy. So we had the whole gamut, and we had a whole cross section of society, but a lot of adults. So we had a pretty extensive plan, more in line with I'd say a college program, a small college program than a high school program.
Obviously, Australians have had a lot of success with punters and with special teams in the NFL and in college. But one person as well that now is carving out their own platform is Jordan Mailata, the starting left tackle for Philly. What do you know about Jordan, and what do you know about punters coming across from Australia in this capacity?
Yeah, what's so interesting about that is way back in the day when I was an assistant at the Jets, I was going back to Australia, and I don't know if they still do the competition, but where they used to see who could kick the ball over. It was over the Yarra. It was a made-for-TV program. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the longest kick over the Yarra River, right?
Yeah. So I was watching that program, and I think Ben Graham won it that year. So I thought, this guy's amazing. I'd love to see what he could do from an American, punting in American football. So I actually got in touch with his agent, who was, I think, Ricky Nixon at the time, got a hold of Ben, met Ben and his girlfriend, who's now his wife, at a paddock in Geelong. We had one American football. I had some buddies with the old VCR cameras sitting on the roof of the locker room, filming it from a distance. And I put him through a punter's workout, and actually brought the tape back to the US to see whether or not we could get Ben a tryout. So Ben at the time, I want to say he was pretty young, 22, 23. He was a young emerging star in the league. So fast forward, nothing comes of it. And in America at that point, people really didn't see that. They didn't get it. They didn't understand it. But Ben ends up coming to the States. He is going to try out for the Jets. He gives me a call. He's going to come to the Patriots. He ends up staying with my wife and I in New England when he tries out for the Patriots. He makes the Jets. I become the head coach of the Jets, and Ben Graham is my punter. When I was the head coach of the Jets, this young kid, fast forward, a few years, and now he's the punter of my team in the NFL. So seeing the athletes that played Aussie rules, seeing the athletes that played rugby, it made sense that those athletes could translate into our game. And even, the guys that couldn't kick very well in the AFL were still big, strong, fast, athletic, tough, all those things you look for. And when you look at what's happened with the Eagles and his progression at left tackle, and the growth that he's made in just 4 years, you see how those athletes have the potential to really make an impact in the future.
And what about their Aussies and their commitment to special teams? Are Americans also aware of this, the fact that Australians typically do come over and fill that punter role so well?
Yeah, there's infinitely more awareness than there ever was. I wanted to set up a combine in Australia and get Australian athletes and New Zealand athletes to work out. And I think there's still value in that to get more of those players on the radar screen. It's hard to coordinate, but there's much more of an awareness, there's much more of an openness now that so many guys have come in and been able to not only punt, but punt successfully. And now there's a defensive end at Jacksonville, who's up from Australia, who's done okay. You've got the success. Yeah, Adam, you have some success, real success now at the offensive line position. The openness is gonna continue to expand.
Now, Coach, comparing the New England Patriots franchise to Jacksonville Jaguars is like comparing the American Olympic team to Uzbekistan. So we always knew coming into this year that Mac Jones was going to have a better season than Trevor Lawrence, but are we still certain that Trevor Lawrence is going to be a better NFL quarterback than Mac Jones throughout their careers?
I've seen so many quarterbacks come through the league, and when you go through the draft process, as people are evaluating players, you hear this is a once in a generational talent. You hear this person is going to change the game. You hear all these unbelievable superlatives that get thrown out on guys, and it's not accurate. It's not fair. It makes good TV, but it's not really the way it works. More of those guys fail than they succeed, and a lot of things go into that, and that's not just their natural ability. It's the team that they get placed with, and it's also the way that they end up handling fame, success, money. These are all young kids that come in, and sometimes the growth of these guys, it takes a couple years. And when Tom Brady was in New England, he wasn't the Tom Brady that we all know now. He wasn't very good that first year. And I coached the defensive backs at the time, and this guy, Brad Seeley, who was a special teams coach, we'd have this post-practice session. It was called an opportunity period, where the young players had an opportunity to get better. So the DBs, the defensive players, would go against the offensive players. Tom was a quarterback, and Brad and I would bet $1 a rep, and I won a bunch of dollars from him because Tom would throw the ball in the dirt, or he'd throw it off target. But he had incredible traits. He had work ethic, he had character, he had intelligence, he had vision, he had all those things. So he continued to get better. To say that he's a lock, to say that Trevor Lawrence is a lock to be better than Mac Jones, I don't think you can say that. Is there potential? Yeah, there's potential, and that's why he got drafted where he got drafted. I don't know enough about his work ethic. I don't know enough about the incremental progress that he's made. I'd like to see more of it. And as we get to this point in the season, the young players should be showing growth. Now, Jacksonville's had a ton of distractions. They've had a ton of things that have gone wrong. But all that being said, you should still see some growth. There are a lot of good coaches on that staff, a lot of them that I know. So I don't think anything is a lock.
One of the big stories to break this week was the sacking of Urban Meyer. What did you make of his treatment of special teams players, given your own love of the special teams positions?
I'm a huge believer in special teams, and it's hard. It's hard going from college football to pro football. It's a totally different world. And I'd say the biggest thing is that you can't recruit a bunch of first-round draft picks to fill your needs like you can in college. And there's not the discrepancy in the programs, not the discrepancy in resources. There's not the discrepancy in desirability. There's not the discrepancy in the opponents that you play. Every single week, even the worst teams in the NFL are really, really good. Nobody graduates. It's adults. There's millionaires. The atmosphere is totally different. And you look at a guy, Nick Saban, who had coached successfully in the NFL, goes to the Dolphins, doesn't end up, he had a chance to get Drew Brees. The doctors ended up canceling that deal, or he would have had Drew Brees, and history may be totally different, but he doesn't. And he decides he'd much rather coach in college football. it's not apples to apples. So as much as you can look at a college coach and say, yeah, this guy's been incredible, more of those guys miss than hit.
Mr. Mangini, you mentioned before how closely you worked with Tom Brady and you've been following his career ever since. From what you've seen of Mac Jones this year, do you see any similarities with the young Tom Brady you coached almost 20 years ago?
It's, again, that's another dangerous comparison. When you try to compare a kid who's played, very few games to the greatest quarterback in the history of football, I think that's a little unfair for him, and it's much too high praise for where he's been. Mac Jones is in a ideal situation. If you could have, you couldn't pick a better situation for him to be in, because there is a premium for a lot of teams for mobile quarterbacks, and you hear about the game changing at the quarterback position where everybody's got to be incredibly mobile, but that's not how New England does it. That's not what they're based upon. They're based on being able to process information, to make pre-snap reads, to intellectually defeat your opponent, play in and play out through your preparation. And that really fits Mac Jones. And he comes from the Alabama program, the discipline of Nick Saban, the expectations of Nick Saban. So he's got that pedigree. He slides into a system that's very similar, that's catered to his skills. He gets a coordinator like Josh McDaniels with the years of experience that he's had and the head coaching experience. It's an ideal situation for him. Now, what I've really liked about him is the things that you hear about his work ethic, about his intelligence, about his general humbleness, and he seems to have embraced his role. And there haven't been many moments throughout the course of the season where you look at it and say, okay, this is too big for him. If anything, you look at it and say, wow, I'm really surprised he performed the way that he did. But from a fusion of talent with the situation, it's about as good as you can get for all involved.
Staying on quarterbacks, Coach, you've dealt with some of the biggest personalities to ever be involved in American sport, with Tom Brady and Brett Favre. Now, if you were going to give a new up-and-coming coach a tip in terms of how to deal with these massive personalities, what would it be?
God, I wish as a young coach I had one of those huge names as a young quarterback. It makes all the difference in the world. And the thing that I think makes Tom Brady as special as he is regardless of how much fame he's had, how much money he's had, how much success he has, he works the same way every day. And you hear about Jerry Rice, and when he was at his greatest, he'd come into the building each day and think that was the day he was going to get cut. And that was the approach that he'd taken. That's the way that he worked. And you didn't get an ego from Tom, and Tom was inherently coachable. And that's a powerful tool in the locker room when you can go and coach your star Super Bowl winning quarterback the same way that you coach everybody else. There's nobody in that locker room that's going to say, well, I don't want to do that, because they see that Tom is willing to do that and take that coaching. My experience with Brett was great too. I didn't know what to expect from Brett, but he was personable. He was open to the ideas that we had. I felt as an organization and as a coaching staff, for us to maximize his ability that late in his career, it was in our best interest to do what he did really well. So we changed a lot of things, but there was never a moment in dealing with him where I thought, this guy's uncoachable, or this guy's difficult. He was good with the players. And I would imagine most of the greatest quarterbacks not only have that ability, but they have the ability to get the people around them to want to fight for them. And not just because they win, but because they care, or they have intangibles that guys want to rally around.
Communication and leadership is just as important as being able to sling that pigskin.
It's huge, and communication from any leadership position is huge. Rodney Harrison told me when I got the job at the Jets, he said, Eric, tell the guys the truth. Tell the guys the truth. They may not like it, but they respect you for telling them that, and it gives them a chance to fix it. And so many times, whether it's in sports or in business or wherever, people avoid the hard conversation, the difficult conversation, and all it does is it ends up festering, and it ends up creating problems, because I think that you think one thing and you think I think something else, and you never get to what the real issue is. So communication with all these athletes is paramount. And I would say with younger athletes and with the changing of the way the athlete is, communication's even more important. They're not going to run through a wall just because you tell them to run through the wall and you're the coach. They want to know, okay, why? How is this going to help us win? And they have every right to have those questions answered.
Okay, mate. I've got a bit of a fanboy question here, and sorry to bring up to dig at old wounds. I'm talking about the 2008 Jets season, of course, where you started 8-3. Then Brett Favre hurts his shoulder, doesn't want to end that consecutive game streak where he still holds the record. It'll never be broken, but because of that streak, he played on. Did you have a hard conversation with Brett to try and get him to sit a game?
Yeah, looking back at that, it's still difficult to figure out whether or not making that move with Brett would really have changed things. Sitting him down would have really changed things. We had a young quarterback who played in the league for a long time, in Kellen Clemens, as his backup. But when you're changing from Brett Favre and stopping his streak and moving to Kellen Clemens, there's multiple effects to that. You may get an uptick in ability, but you may not, because you've lost so much experience. And even though Brett was hurt, Brett had played through a lot of injuries over the course of his career and done really well. I remember one week he had a ridiculous ankle sprain, and it didn't look like he was going to play, and he goes out and he throws 5 touchdowns. And it's just one of those things where was that the whole reason? No, we could have played better in a lot of areas. I could have coached better. We could have done things better defensively. We made some mistakes in a lot of different areas. And I don't know if sitting him down at that point would have been the difference or not, even all these years after that. I would have much rather had him healthy.
You, of course, talk a bit about that team, and we did see them go on to make the 2009 and 2010 AFC Championship, the Jets, that is. Do you look at that team and think that was partly thanks to your success and you helped build what was a great team at the time?
Yeah, that team was loaded when I left. And then, look, they were talented, they were disciplined, they were young. And we were coming off a winning season. It's not like we had lost the year before. We were 9-7, and they finished up 9-7 the next year. And the difference is they got into the playoffs. Who knows what would happen had we gotten into the playoffs? But I know the type of people that we committed to. We had very strong core values. We had very strong core characteristics in what we look for from our players, and that locker room was filled with not only good players, but good human beings who are disciplined and all working in the same direction. So that wasn't easy to get to, and it took a long time to get to that point. I would have loved to have been able to see that through, and I think that a lot of the lessons those guys learned carried over to the following years.
And sorry to bring it back to Brett Favre again, but you did coach a great Green Bay quarterback who in his first team after the Packers. When you look at Aaron Rodgers now, do you have any advice for a coach who may take him over next year?
I'm not convinced he's leaving next season, just like I wasn't convinced he was leaving this season. And I don't know why Green Bay would let him go. They've got him under contract for another year. They don't have to let him go. I think the issue there is financial commitment. And that was the issue this offseason. When you draft a quarterback in the first round and you're going to play out the string with the quarterback that you have, you can see why that quarterback who won the MVP last season would be frustrated, especially when he sees Tom go to Tampa Bay and pick up $50 million in new money. So I would imagine these problems can be solved through a gigantic contract. And I don't see how it's in Green Bay's best interest at all to let him leave. Here's another great season that he's putting together. Who are you going to replace him with that's going to be even close to what you're getting now? I think if anything, you figure out a way to make him happy and you pay him.
Who's going to face off in the AFC and NFC championship games?
That's not that generic a question. One of the beautiful things about the league right now is there's 27 teams that can still get into the playoffs. And when you look at this group of contenders, everyone has a problem and everyone's going through some sort of new adversity. I'd say the most exciting teams for me right now are the most stable teams are probably the Packers and Kansas City, but Kansas City not for the way that you'd expect them to be there. It's because their defense is playing so much better. Offensively, they're still struggling. It's not a slump. It's 10 times better than what it was, and they fixed their biggest problem, which is turnovers. But it's the defense has played incredibly through the second part of the season. In terms of who they'll face off against, I love Tampa Bay because of Tom Brady and my history with him, and I've just learned over time that you can't bet against him. And then on the other side, I'm a big believer in the Buffalo Bills, even though they've had quite a few struggles and been up and down through the course of the season. I'm hopeful that they're going to be able to get that straightened out and put together a nice run at the end here.
Just on that, mate, do we think this is the new status quo for Pat Mahomes? Has he fallen back to the pack?
Well, it's one of those things where we teach players and we teach teams all the time. We talk to teams and players all the time about dealing with adversity. And sometimes you really have to learn how to deal with success. And that's a different part of the equation. And I think with Mahomes and with Kansas City, they got so used to no matter what happened, he'd be able to bail them out that they relied on that. And it's a problem because you can't always be Superman. Sometimes you've got to be Clark Kent. And that can play both ways in the sense that other people have to figure out a way to help support you and find a way to win. And you can't take chances that are unnecessary chances because you think you've got to do it all on your own and you've got to carry the team on your back. So this to me is part of the learning process. And he had a ton of turnovers in the early part of the year. They've almost, I think, a little bit better than half the turnovers, maybe even more than that in terms of how much they've cut that back. And that to me is significant progress, even though the explosive offensive plays that we're used to seeing may not be there.
Now, we're going to give you a chance here to put your GM/coach hat on. If you were given a chance to go away and start a new franchise where you were able to pick a quarterback, a running back, and a wide receiver of your choice, we'll throw in a coach as well, and you could build your own franchise with those players, who would you say would be the best picks for each of those positions?
Yeah, quarterback is tough because I get the quarterbacks at their current age. I mean, how can you go wrong with starting a team with Tom Brady? It's just you don't really want to start it right now. Aaron Rodgers is another amazing option. How many years do you have? Is he committed to playing 4 or 5 more years, or is this a 1 or 2 year deal? Then I'd look at a guy like Patrick Mahomes. I would think that you have a chance to compete to the Super Bowl every single year if you have Patrick Mahomes. Justin Herbert's really intriguing right now in terms of young quarterbacks. In terms of coaches, I like Brian Daboll a lot, the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. I think that what he's done with Josh Allen, because Josh Allen came out of college being a very up and down quarterback. And his early seasons in Buffalo, he struggled and he made tremendous progress. And he's been a little bit up and down. And you're going to get some of that. But the progress that he's made through the way that Brian Daboll has coached him, to me, tells me that he can develop young talent. And I worked with Brian in New England. He was with me at the Jets. He was my offensive coordinator in Cleveland, and he's worked on the defensive side of the ball. He was the offensive coordinator at Alabama. He's worked with Nick Saban. So I think he's going to be a really good head coach. And I would probably go that route as opposed to an established coach if I was starting a team. You know, I love Derrick Henry in terms of a running back. I mean, the guy's amazing. You can easily make a compelling argument for him as being a candidate for MVP prior to him getting injured. Receiver, I don't know the answer on receiver. Receivers are tricky because it's not just their ability, it's also how much of a management issue there is during the course of the week to get them to the field. And I don't have a great feel for the core guys right now.
That sounds like a bit of a dream fantasy team there. It seems like any fan would like to see that group together. But you mentioned the Bills there and their offensive coordinator. When you look to this marquee game this weekend between the Bills and the Pats, do you think it's going to play out similarly to how that weather-affected game went, where the Patriots only ran the ball, didn't throw it with Mac Jones? How do you think that game will turn out? Will the Bills be a bit bristled by that as well?
Well, that game could have been radically different. The Bills were, I think, 1 for 4 in the red zone. And, you know, any one of those opportunities that either is a field goal or a touchdown, and the game is dramatically different. You know, I'm gonna be talking about the game tomorrow, and I'd say if I'm New England, I would make sure that Josh Allen doesn't beat me with his feet, and he can make those off schedule plays. He can hurt you when he gets out of the pocket and scrambles, or he gets out of the pocket and throws. It's not as dynamic outside the pocket as a Mahomes is, or even Ben Roethlisberger back in his day, if you look at size with size. But I would use him if I'm Buffalo in some key situations as a runner with those quarterback driven runs. I think that'll help get your running backs going. But if you use him in either in 3rd and short, 3rd down in general, red zone, you know, I would be alert for that from New England's perspective, and that'd be something I'd want to do from a Bills perspective. If I were the Bills too, I try to spread New England out as much as possible. They're big, they're strong, but you know, when you're big and strong, you're built to fight in a phone booth, not necessarily out in space. So the more that you can get those big guys out in space, I think that'll help Buffalo a lot. And look, the weather really didn't allow you to do that last time. Buffalo defensively, if I'm attacking New England, I'm gonna have a lot of inside pressure on Mac Jones, because just like Tom, he's not going to hurt you scrambling. You want to get him off the spot. You want to make him make quick decisions. I'd have tight coverage, man-to-man coverage, so there's no easy answers that he can quickly get to when the pressure comes. And then from New England's perspective, I would make the Bills prove that they can stop the run. I'd make them prove it. You know, they couldn't last time. See whether they've got their problems fixed. And one of the things that coaches get into, and it happens in games and it happens the second time you play people, sometimes you think they've got their problems fixed and you give them the benefit of the doubt and you let them off the hook. If I was New England, I wouldn't let these guys off the hook until they showed me that they could stand up and not get bullied like they got bullied last time.
A lot of our listeners and fans here in Australia are probably just starting to dip their toes into American football and the NFL. What's something that you would recommend to them about better ways to watch or understand and learn about the game?
Well, one of the things that helps my kids and has helped them since they were young, and I think it helps a lot of new fans, is fantasy football. When you have to draft a team, even if you don't know anything and you get a computer-driven team, if you had a group of friends that were interested, but maybe didn't know a lot, playing a fantasy season changes everything, because you're going to look at stats. You're going to try to figure out what the stats mean. It forces you to dig a little bit deeper, but in a fun way, in a competitive way. Betting is becoming a bigger thing in the States. I know my Australian friends like to place bets on lots of different things, and that's not a foreign concept to most Australians. Putting a little bit of money on games always makes it more interesting. Video games, that's another way that a lot of people learn about football, especially if you're younger and you're into gaming. That could be a fun way to do it as well.
Mr. Mangini, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on the show. And if there's a chance where you'll be back in Australia at some point, COVID permitting, we would love to have you here in the studio to go through a bit more in-depth analysis with us.
If I get back to Australia, which I hope I will soon, I would happily come into the studio.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Coach. Cheers, mate.
All right, guys, take care.
Wow, how good was that? Mr. Mangini, that was such a great scoop. Thank you, Hugo. Thanks to the boys for setting that up. That was great. He had so many good answers for us and just such a great NFL mind to be able to pick for us. We do move now into the more typical side of the show, but it will have a slightly different feel, with Christmas and stuff in the air. I will jump through a few reviews of some of the games that were. We had some crackers, notably the first being the Indianapolis Colts were at home to the New England Patriots. And the story, once again here, was Jonathan Taylor. JT rushing for 170 yards on a 5.9 yard average, plus a touchdown. That's incredible. He is in serious MVP form.
Considering Bill Belichick is famous for trying to take away the opposition's best asset, and that is for sure Taylor, and the fact he still ran roughshod, it actually leans into the reason why this team beat the Pats. They were better at Pats football. They were better in the trenches with their big men. And, dude, I don't know if you know this, Carson Wentz had 5 completions.
Yeah.
That's why they actually didn't blow that fourth quarter lead like they did against Baltimore at the start of the year, because the coach was like, nah, not today. You're not throwing away this game. You're throwing it 5 times and we will win, and it happened.
It was almost a tale of two quarterbacks in that sense. That Carson Wentz, 5 of 12, almost similar to Mac's handoff special victory against the Bills in the snow. And on the flip side of that, despite the loss, Mac went 26 of 45, which is not a good completion rate, for almost 300 yards, 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. Hunter Henry with 2 touchdowns for the Patriots as well, starting to find some form.
This is the famous loss the Patriots need before the playoffs.
Yes,
from here.
You tipped it, mate, and they'll match up again in the playoffs where the Pats will win. That's the tip from Hugo. So the Colts now 8-6, the Pats are 9-5. And this is all I'm going to say on this, all right? If the Bills beat the Patriots and then the Dolphins beat the Patriots again, like they did earlier, the Patriots will be 3rd in the AFC East. After all of this chatter about the Patriots. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I just like the idea that maybe the Dolphins will jump ahead of them. The next game we'll move into, though, boys, is the Chargers. This was Thursday Night Football. The Chargers at home in LA to the Kansas City Chiefs. An absolute thriller, probably one of the best games of the year. 34-28. The story in this one was Mahomes for me. 410 yards, 3 touchdowns, a pick. Connecting with his 2 favorite targets, as always. Kelsey, 10 receptions, 191 yards. And Tyreek Hill, 12 receptions for 148 yards, both with a 10-plus yard average. That's crazy numbers.
Both coaches forgot their field goal kickers and their punters existed, and they went for it. It was an absolute cracking game, and we saw the Chiefs go back to what they do best, which is to just score points. The Chargers still have something left, so it'll be fun to watch.
I mean, did they go back to just scoring points, or did they do it in a 7-minute window in the fourth quarter?
Yeah.
They have sucked all year except against the AFC West. They've trounced Oakland. Fine. Your offense looks great against Oakland. Fine. Your offense looks great for 7 minutes versus the Chargers, division rivals. But I'm not ready to say, like I mentioned to Coach Mangini, I'm not ready to say this team is back to one of the best offenses of all time or for this century, which is what they were just 18 months ago. But I will say this. If they continue that trend, Hugo was correct in that they have turned the corner, because that now they're on a trajectory. They waxed the Raiders. They got the job done versus the Chargers. If they can continue onwards and upwards, we're looking at a team that's 2 weeks away from being the Super Bowl favourite.
Couldn't agree more. That overtime touchdown run, catch and run for Kelsey as well, immaculate. You guys do love to beef about Austin Eckler, so I did just want to mention that he had less touches than Justin Jackson and a worse net average in this game. And I've personally never heard of Justin Jackson.
Has COVID now too, so might miss another week.
So Justin Jackson's looking good for a few more weeks then. Another game that must be mentioned was the Lions, the mighty Detroit Lions at home against the Arizona Cardinals. Huge game with ramifications for the NFC at both ends of the table, really, as one team goes draft hunting and one team goes Super Bowl hunting. And the story for this one was the difference in the days for the two quarterbacks. Jared Goff, man on fire, 21 of 26 completions, no picks. I don't know the last time Jared Goff didn't have a pick in a game. 3 touchdowns as well. And the other side of that, Kyler Murray got benched against the Detroit Lions. That is something. That's the headline.
I mean, Cliff Kingsbury is now 1-10 versus Sean McVay and or Jared Goff teams. So yeah, he doesn't like anything to do with that side of the ball. But the Lions are talent poor, right? And the talent they have that actually makes them poor weren't even there. They were missing Jamal Williams. They were missing Swift. They were missing Hawkinson easily outside of the quarterback, the 3 most important players on that offense, which leads me to my point about this game. Their rookie class is doing really well. Sewell, if he can stay upright, he's going to be awesome. But this other kid...
Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, and one more, it's Charles Harris. He's doing really well too. So, and you have a look at the teams that the Lions beat and even drew with, all got winning records. They're a competitive football team, even though their record's not as good as it was under their previous coach, who's the dude with the pencil behind him.
Matt Patricia,
yeah. I still think their new coach is a big upgrade on what we've seen in the last few seasons.
Yeah, Dan Campbell's brought the passion back to Detroit. The only annoying thing for the fans, I think they would have liked their first overall pick. But then again, this draft doesn't seem as good as next year's, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, 2 final takeaways from that game for me. One was Craig Reynolds, who is, I'm guessing, a backup fullback because he's running around in number 46, which you don't see too often, had more than 100 yards on the ground. We love to see that. And now also, most importantly, the Rams are now in striking distance of the Cards. There are 5 good teams in the NFC with who all have winning records, who appear to be the clear front runners.
And 11 shit ones.
And 3 of those 5 good teams are in the NFC West. So it just speaks volumes to how strong that division is.
It's crazy that San Francisco can still realistically win the NFC West. The Cardinals have a tough run home. They've got the Cowboys, they've got the Titans. It's a tough run. And week 18 is going to be an absolute ball tear, if I can say that, on Fox Sports YouTube. It's San Francisco versus the LA Rams. Now, if LA lose one between now and then and San Francisco win out between now and then, it is game on for the NFC West.
Final game, which I wanted to mention, obviously, was the mighty Miami Dolphins playing the New York Jets. I don't have many notes for this other than some insults that I wanted to throw Hugo's way. The Dolphins keep their extremely thin playoff hopes alive. A classic and timeless Dolphins performance. Slowly rebuild my hopes and beliefs just to ultimately fall short at the final hurdle. I can't wait.
Second team in NFL history to start 1-7 and then be 7-7 after 14 games.
Incredible run by the Dolphins. I just want to say I was pretty proud of my Jetties. They threw in a bit of a razzle-dazzle performance, some crazy quarterback scrambles, crazy trick plays. We're not going to be good this year, we know it, but we'll see you in 3 years or so.
It's almost over. You weren't good this year. But what about, we'll stay on it for 1 sec, Hugo. Do you have your quarterback?
Good question. I want to see
Scary
him.
question.
I want to see him for 1 more year. That's a pretty strong offensive line building in New York. I really like what he's brought in terms of a personality standpoint. He's massive. Like he's good for morale at the moment, and we're seeing improvement. Let's hope it's a Peyton Manning jump from year 1 to year 2.
I mean, you cop an Alex Smith jump at this stage, but yeah.
Awesome. We'll move on quickly to some Australians as well. We do have our Aussie watch as usual. First punter off the ranks, first cab off the ranks, first punter that I wanted to mention, Mitch Wishnowsky for the 49ers in a W over the Falcons. Had a 49-yard average on 4 punts. That immediately gets my attention. And a special shout out to Cam Johnson of the Texans, who only had to punt 4 times in their win over the Jags, which is the first time Cam Johnson has had to punt under 6 times in a match. So I'm happy for him. A well-earned half day for him this year. Gotsis in the same matchup had 2 solo tackles. You go, Gotsis. Michael Dixon for Seattle, 6 punts as usual on a 49.5-yard average, 3 of them inside 20. Crazy. They did lose to the Rams, though. Philly was back. The boys can get fired up about Jalen Hurts. Jordan Mailata, key man in their unstoppable running game, as Aaron Sipsis also had a great day. 2 punts, 1 inside 20. The W over WFT there. Jordan Berry for the Vikings and a W over Chicago had almost 300 yards of punting offense on 7 attempts.
Kirk Cousins sucked that game. That's why he kicked so much.
Yeah, they did somehow manage to scrape the W over the Bears.
They played Chicago, that's why.
Exactly. Beating me to the punchline, Chad. But yeah, Aussies performing admirably yet again. And there is a real chance that we'll see a few of those boys, well, at least a few of them, in the playoffs this year. Mitch Wishnowsky for sure is looking very likely. Philly look like they have a good chance. And Jordan Perry might sneak in with the Vikings as well. So fingers crossed to see a few people flying that Australian flag proudly in the playoffs. We'll move into some previews because this week we've got a couple of really good matchups. First one I want to talk about is coming to us now in less than 24 hours. It is the first matchup of the week, which is the Tennessee Titans at home in the Music City to the San Francisco 49ers. And sorry, there wasn't much of a question there. Does anyone want to jump in on that? I have the Titans now at 9-5 and the 49ers 8-6. They're both at crucial points for making it to the playoffs.
It's amazing because if you go back 5 weeks, Titans were one of the informed teams in the AFC. Everyone was wondering whether Shanahan would get sacked. Now you reverse it and you'd say the team's fortunes have completely gone in opposite directions. The Titans, we know what they're dealing with, so many injuries. We're hoping Derrick Henry can get back for the playoffs. If they make it, they should. The Niners just seem to be getting better and better, and they're almost like a Swiss Army knife. They can beat you on the ground, and that's basically down to Deebo Samuel, let's be honest. Yeah. They can beat you on the ground with Deebo. They've got their running backs who are really rotating through that, who gets the rushes, Jeff Wilson, etc., Deebo as well. Their defense is getting stronger and stronger. This is going to be a close one and a great way to kick off the week.
Yeah, I think we're looking at a couple of teams that are going to make the first round of the playoffs very interesting because this current iteration of the Titans isn't exciting, but they'll do Titans things, which is they'll beat teams that are better than them and they'll be real competitive against teams they should whoop. So they're a bit of a question mark. The only question I don't have around them is I'm pretty certain they're going to make the playoffs and they're going to deserve it. But in regards to the 49ers, they're 5 from their last 6. Now, I talk a lot, so sometimes I'm going to be right about stuff. One of those things was, I told Hugo I thought San Francisco was going to turn the corner early in the year, not to give up on them too soon, because you just have to look at that roster. It is a stacked roster on offense and defense. Like, you forget they've got a Bosa. And their linebackers have been elite for what feels like a decade. And a guy who I had as a non-QB MVP a week or two ago, Deebo Samuel, is one of the best things to watch in the NFL, but I think Cooper Kupp's overtaken him while we're on that. But yeah, big win for San Francisco if they can get up this week. It keeps them right in contention for that NFC West like we were talking about earlier. And what are they behind Green Bay? 2 games? Mate.
Oh, they're not in the same league. They're not in the same league. They're not near.
I do.
Yeah, I can't wait to see them make the playoffs, get knocked out in the wild card rounds.
Oh, I disagree, boys. I think
depends who they play. If they go to Green Bay, they lose. But San Francisco can beat anyone in the NFL on their day.
Well, they'll be hoping Green Bay have the bye. The Niners basically now have a 1-game buffer over a lot of the rest of the teams in the wild card / playoff picture. So they're looking pretty good. The Titans are also pushing for top seeds. This is a huge game for both teams. If the Titans lose, they start to fall into that murky AFC picture, which nobody wants to be in at the moment. The Niners, I'm prepared to say, are quite safe. I think they've locked a wild card position up, and they definitely will with a win. Next game, huge AFC North matchup. The Cincinnati Bengals at home in Ohio to the Baltimore Ravens. They are both 8-6. You almost feel whoever loses this, it's starting to look very, very difficult to make it to the playoffs. Even though 8-7, still a winning record, still okay for the AFC. You can't be losing these big, close games at the end of the year. And this, I want to say, is what makes the division system so fun. It's what makes it so successful. When you have 4 great and competitive teams jinking it out for that spot, everyone in this AFC North has been fun to watch at one point through the year. This is just going to be like the showpiece finale almost for the AFC North.
Yeah, we talk about the NFC West every week, but AFC North is close and competitive. Anyone can win it from here, really. The Steelers, the Browns, we're talking about Bengals and Ravens right now. The Ravens, no matter what happens, Harbaugh's coach of the year. The amount of injuries they've had this year, they lose 3 running backs to start the season. They've had, Latavius Murray, Devonta Freeman, Le'Veon Bell, who's just signed for the Bucs. He's just left, but he kind of filled in that running back rotation before. We saw last week Lamar Jackson ruled out with injury. Tyler Huntley steps in and comes within a questionable 2-point conversion call to really send the Ravens into complete a playoff lock spot. This will be interesting because it's what we've been saying about the Bengals. The Bengals have that team with raw potential, have that first overall pick, Joe Burrow. They've got Jamar Chase, who's arguably the best young wide receiver in the league. I know you might disagree with Jalen Waddle.
No, I would agree.
It's Chase. And they've got
Jefferson,
T. Higgins, who's sneaky good, will get you when you're not watching.
Tyler Boyd,
who had a great game last week, huge game. What we've been wondering though for ages is, can the Bengals step up and win when it matters? We saw them lose to the Chargers. We saw them lose to the Niners in overtime. This will be the test against a wounded Ravens side. Can they get a win and secure their playoff spot, secure their spot in the AFC North as the next top dog?
The Bengals waxed the Ravens earlier this year.
Wow.
41-17.
How quick we are to forget, hey?
And then 2 weeks later got waxed by the Browns, 41-16. So that's why this AFC North is so hotly contested. They rock, scissors, paper each other, similar to the NFC West. You don't know who's going to win any of these matchups. Think 5 years ago when the Steelers and Ravens would only lose to the Steelers and Ravens. And the Browns and Bengals were a joke. That's why the NFL's so good. These storylines change, not just throughout a year, but throughout a decade. And now here we are, the Bengals facing off against the Ravens for a playoff berth. Essentially, I think you boys are right. Whoever loses this is done. And as good of a job as Harbaugh has done, hard to win Coach of the Year if you're not in those playoffs, baby. Bill Belichick is my nomination for Coach of the Year too. Getting it done with a rookie QB, winning 6 games straight with a rookie QB is massive when you didn't even make the playoffs the year before. But on this game, I want the Bengals to win in a big way.
The only other thing worth mentioning from this game for me was, of course, the decision at the end to again go for 2, which is now, the analytics, I guess, are starting to stack up for them because they were 0-2 on these, so sooner or later it has to go their way. But when you have the best kicker in the world on your team in Justin Tucker and you're down by 14, I don't understand why. Normally, you go for 2 to try and snake the win if you're away from home is the choice. But if you're at home with your fans, I don't see the issue with taking both kicks in that instance and tying it up.
I'm not a coach in the NFL, though, so...
Not yet, mate.
Mr. Mangini, though, hopefully he'll be able to give me a shout-out. How good was it to talk to him, boys? I think we've got more than enough content for our lovely listeners. And I would just like to say, most importantly, I hope everyone has a very special Christmas and a happy New Year. We'll be bringing you more awesome content in the start of 2022. Much love.
Merry Christmas, mate.